This is Aaron Ginsburg, and you are watching the TV Writer Podcast.
Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for script writing information in print and on the web. This is Gray, and I'm here with TV and feature writer-producer Aaron Ginsburg. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Cool. Really appreciate you coming on. And wow, you've actually dabbled in a whole pile of different things. You've directed plays, you've written for video games, you've written for comics, and you were actually the former senior editor of Script Magazine. So this is actually a really interesting tie-in.
Yeah, totally. I worked for Script for quite a few years, actually.
Mm-hmm. And you wrote the column Hollywood Hell about your not so glamorous rise through the ranks in the biz.
Yep.
And
I also did some interviews similar to what you're doing, so it's kind of fun.
Yeah, and actually it's the not so glamorous rise that I think is really interesting and of particular interest to this podcast. I'm sure we've all read Adventures in the Screen Trade.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, it's those not glamorous bits that are the reality of rising up in the biz.
Yes, that is true. I did come to Los Angeles with the hopes and dreams of being a television writer, and I really did believe it would be like easier than it was. I don't know why. I guess when you're younger, you're like, I can do it, but it's not an easy business to crack into, and so I was able to keep my spirits high despite just, one humiliation after another for many years, which have provided lots of great anecdotes, but it was a twisty, windy version of success for sure.
Cool. Well, let's talk about that. So you started out where?
Well, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I'd come from I'd been in New York because I was trying to be a playwright, because that seemed like a really good idea. You can make a ton of money as a playwright. So I was in New York for a while, and then I had been lured to Los Angeles by a script I'd written, and they were like, "Oh, it was a feature actually," and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be made, and we have to come to Los Angeles for meetings." And of course, by the time I'd uprooted my whole life, that project had fallen apart. So I was here. LA had lured me over here, and now I was stuck. So I started basically working in production offices, trying to sort of learn the business from that way, from sort of like the bottom up, as they say. And it was, I worked for, even as I'm saying them, it's like the humiliation is so absurd because I did some crazy ones, including I pretended to be a lawyer at a entertainment law firm.
No, seriously.
Yeah, I started in the mailroom and basically what happened was one of the lawyers in the firm had to go on maternity leave, and one of the other lawyers was like, "Oh my God, would you mind sitting at her desk and like handling some of the paperwork?" Because they figured out that I'd learned stuff pretty quickly, and I picked it up, and we just need some extra hands. All you have to do is look over these contracts, and if you have any questions, you can ask us. And I was like, "Oh my God, it's the secret of my success. This is like totally how it's supposed to happen." Yeah. So I embraced it. I embraced it, and for months I basically masqueraded as an entertainment attorney because it's kind of the same as writing. Like you're just writing. It's like as if you're writing a monologue for a David E. Kelly law show or something. Like
wow,
like all the contracts are the same. I've actually written a bunch of articles about it because people don't believe this is true, but it did actually happen, and I put them up on my Tumblr for free. They were Script Magazine articles, and I've now posted them to my Tumblr. So people should check them out if they want to see the ins and outs of me failing or succeeding, depending on how you look at it as a entertainment lawyer.
That is hilarious. Yeah. It's funny. You watch a movie like Secret of My Success, and as fun as it is, you think, that could never happen.
Yeah. The thing that I realized really quickly was that being a lawyer is really, really hard. I love being a writer, but being a lawyer, I was like, oh my God, this is really tricky. There's all these laws. I gotta learn this law.
That's great. Well, so from being a pseudo entertainment lawyer, then what happened?
I think I would say my first step into writing, getting paid to write, was I stumbled somewhat haphazardly into writing for reality television, and it was a very weird medium. It's gotten so much more prevalent. But when I started, it was not as well known that everything is written. I think people know it's all written, but But I ended up I work with a writing partner named Wade McIntyre, and we've been a team for over 10 years actually.
And how did you guys meet?
We went to undergrad together, and we both knew we wanted to be writers. And then after we graduated, he went on to get a master's degree, and I went to New York. And years down the line, a couple years later, we ended up in LA together, and we both had written spec scripts. And I was like, "Oh, would you take a look at mine?" And he's like, "Yeah, would you look at mine?" And then we swapped, and I had a ton of notes for him, and he had a ton of notes for me. And we were like, this would be a lot easier if we just combined our forces. We could do twice as much. And it's always nice to have. I mean, when you're in the TV writing world, you're always writing in a group with a group of guys, a group of people. Yeah. Not guys, I meant, folks. Not men. I just realized how sexist that's sound. And it's a really important skill to be able to collaborate and work with people. And when you're in a writing team, you sort of are a mobile writing team, a writing room. You always have somebody to bounce ideas off and be like, "Does this work?" Or "I need another word for this," or that kind of thing. So we've been a team, and we were a team during the reality show era of our career, which was writing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of everything from MTV dating shows to Japanese game shows to a show that now is kind of popular called Ninja Warrior on NBC. We wrote 250 episodes of
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, in it's not as common to have writing teams in reality.
No, I mean, because of the way that reality works, we often would split up when we were producing the shows. Oftentimes, like for the MTV dating shows, I would be producing one episode while he was producing another episode entirely at the same time, just in different locations around Los Angeles. And we would be just, standing just off camera, telling the 18-year-old frat guy the exact best pickup line to get the Hooters waitress or whatever. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't glamorous.
Yeah. The not so hidden world of reality TV.
Yeah.
And you actually sold a half-hour single camera comedy to Spike TV. Now, was that reality based or was that an actual?
No, that was a comedy. Basically, we teamed up with a comedian who's really funny named Brendan Walsh, and had this idea to do like a single camera comedy show that featured him as the lead, and it was sort of slacker surrealism would be the only way to describe it.
Surrealism. Okay.
The premise of the show, it was called Crowded Apartment, and the premise was 27 guys share a one-room apartment in Austin, Texas.
27?
Yeah, only paying $30 a month in rent.
Oh my goodness. And
we the idea was we had our core group of guys that were like the leads, but kind of like Lost. Every single scene, there was like 20 other dudes in every scene, like sleeping under the sink or smoking a bong or like, making a sandwich. Like it was like the house was packed and like they only had one room, but it was for people like, I think all of us have, at least all men, I think when you're in your early 20s, think to yourself, we should get a bunch of guys and rent a house. We could get a much better house. So this idea was like, what if we push that to the extreme? Basically they've created this slacker utopia where literally you have no responsibilities and rent is only $30 and you always have, it was absurd. But yeah, we sold it to Spike, which was right up there, right in their sort of like sweet spot. But they actually, we went all the way through the process. And then they ended up not making any. They picked our show up and two other shows, and they made none of them. They still haven't really done any scripted. I think they're sticking with the wrestling at the moment.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Oh, actually, that sounds ludicrous, but I actually lived in a place that had 9 guys at one point.
See, there's some truth to this idea that all of us know it on some level that might embarrass us, but
yeah, cool. So from there, reality TV, and you sold this single camera comedy. So what happened then? And at what point did you start writing for Script Magazine?
Script Magazine happened because Wade and I wrote a video game called Call of Duty 2, The Big Red One, which was a follow-up to the sort of successful Call of Duty franchise. And I really wanted this job because I would say I'm a casual gamer, but I really like the idea of telling stories through games. So we got this job after much struggling. And when it was done, Script Magazine reached out to us to ask if we would write an article about the process because they were sort of intrigued.
Oh, okay.
So we wrote this article about what it was like to write the game, and I just fell in love with the people at Script and with the process of it. Forced me to analyze what I do and write it into like sort of this this narrative that like I could teach people, or I had made me think about it, I guess. So I was like, I asked Script would they ever let me contribute again, and they said yes. So I jumped on, starting. I think I wrote a couple freelance articles, and then I did a couple interviews, and then after that, they asked me to come on as a senior editor for many years.
Wow!
I would do oftentimes 2 to 3 articles an issue.
Wow, very, very cool. And and so by this point, you were dabbling in a whole bunch of different things. I mean, single camera comedy, reality. You're writing for this magazine, video games. You'd written features /S. And so what would you say your goal was at that point? Were you just getting work wherever you could, or? Well,
you had to pay the bills, obviously. And believe me, writing for reality TV was much more fun than pretending to be a lawyer. So at least it was a step up in that sense. But yeah, the goal had never changed, which was to write scripted television. Like that's all I wanted to do. And it's just not as easy to get in as I suspected. And so I sort of felt like all of these little tangents that I would find myself on career-wise, I found them very frustrating at the time. And it was like, I can't believe I have to do another, season of Next or whatever on MTV. I can't believe it. It's so heartbreaking. And what I didn't realize was that I had slowly and sort of inexplicably picked up all the skills you need to produce scripted television based on all of these other jobs. So when I finally got my first scripted TV show, I was beyond prepared. I was not your average staff writer because I'd already produced hundreds and hundreds of episodes of television, both on set and in post and all this stuff. So like I'd picked it all up, although I didn't know it at the time. At the time I was like, no more Ninja Warrior,
Well, it's an interesting challenge because I do find a lot of people that I talk to, specifically, I mean, the people who watch this podcast tend to be people who are either trying to break in or maybe they're sort of early in their careers and they're trying to get sort of more where they want to be. And I find that a lot of us have to be entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs in the sense of we're trying to get as close to what we want to do, but it ends up being a little too far away. And sometimes we can major in the minors. How would you say that factored into this part of your process?
Well, definitely when you like in reality, like I got into reality and then it was really hard to get out of it because I was doing a good job, despite the fact that my heart wasn't necessarily in it. But to answer your question, that's a good question. I feel like at the end of the day, like there's always more to learn. I feel like you always have to be pushing yourself, and this business isn't going to hand you anything. Like you kind of have to fight for it. But the people who sit back and just expect it to land in their lap, I think have a much harder journey and a longer journey. Like the sooner you can take your own career into your own hands and just like, teach yourself what you need to learn. And like one of the things I loved about writing for Script actually was I got I got the chance to basically interview all these huge feature writers. At that point, when I was at Script, they kind of only focused on the feature side. And I got to ask them anything I wanted to ask them. So and were they going to like open a door for me at that time in my career or introduce me to their agent? Of course not. And I would never have asked. It never even came up. But I could ask them how they did how they wrote, like what was their, and so I ended up using Script as this like sort of masterclass for myself. And I tried to share all what I learned in the articles, but like, I was like, I'm going to make the use of this weird job that I'm doing that isn't what I want to be doing to prepare myself for when I actually have the opportunity to get in the right door, get in the right room. Does that answer your question?
Sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you never know. I always tell people you never know when like opportunity is going to knock, and when it does, you have to be ready. And one of the ways I got into a lot of things had to conspire for me to get my first official scripted TV writing job. And one of the ones was I had been writing for Script Magazine for a couple of years. I'd written, I don't know how many, 50 or 60 articles at that point. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to the editor and said, I noticed you don't do any TV interviews. It's only features. And I would love to interview a showrunner. And they were like, oh, well, do you have one in mind? And I said, yeah, I would love to interview Matt Nix about Burn Notice. Because I had a friend who worked for him, so I knew I could reach out to him that way. I'd met him once at a party or something. Mm-hmm. And they said, yeah, if you can get him to agree to it, yeah, we'll do an interview. And I was like, great. And I said, I think I'd like to do it my own way, though. I'd like to make it my own and not just another, Entertainment Weekly puff piece or something, right. And they said, what would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to interview him, but I would like to be a character in this article. I would like to really make it feel like nothing you've ever read. And they were skeptical, as you can imagine. And I reached out to Matt Nix and I said, I'd like to interview you for this magazine, but I want to do a different interview than you've ever done before. While I'm interviewing you, I want to break into a CIA building and then we'll blow it up at the end. And Matt Nix was like, I don't know what that means, but I am totally into this idea. So I interviewed Matt and we did a photo shoot with it that is me interviewing Matt while he's dressed kind of like Michael Weston, the spy from Burn Notice. Uh-huh. And the photos tell this in the interview is kind of like a narrative. It's like an episode of Burn Notice in and of itself. Wow. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It has all of the twists that a Burn Notice episode has, all in an article about writing Burn Notice. And at the end, we blow up we have a big special effect, and there's a great photo of it. And I turned it in, and Script was baffled. They did not know quite what to make of it, but they put it in the magazine, and it got a ton of responses. And the person who was most flattered and stunned was Matt Nix. Wow. Who was like, I've read a lot of specs for Burn Notice, but you managed to write a Burn Notice spec in 1,500 words, in an article. Like you've demonstrated, the structure of my show better than people who have submitted specs to me. Wow. I was like, whoa, that's what I was secretly hoping for. So he brought me in for a meeting with Wade, and we ended up developing a TV show idea with Matt for 6 months, working on this new idea that we never have really pitched anywhere. Because what ended up happening was, like, a week before we were planning on taking it out, Matt sold The Good Guys, and called me up and was like, I sold this show called The Good Guys, so I can't take out the show idea we were working because I'm a little busy now, but I'd love for you to come and write on The Good Guys. Wow. And you said, nah. Yeah, exactly. I was like, when do we start? So yeah, we jumped in and Matt basically threw us in, and we ended up writing a fourth of that first season of The Good Guys. Wow. Very, very cool. And so you were in, and as you said, you'd already gotten familiar with a lot of the parts of the process, so you must have just hit the ground running. Yeah, it felt like it was only then that I realized, I've been preparing for this my whole life. Like I was nervous. I remember going in that first day, and then I met the other writers who were amazing, and it just was a great team. And yeah, it was just an incredible experience of now you're doing it, and it wasn't as foreign as I expected it. It was not that different than reality TV. Just there's a lot better actors in scripted. That's the main. You still have to think on your feet and solve problems while you're on set and all that kind of jazz. Very cool. And you did end up working for part of the Burn Notice franchise, which was The Fall of Sam Axe. Tell me about that. Oh, yes. After The Good Guys finished, Matt had basically sold the idea of doing a prequel starring Bruce Campbell, directed by Jeffrey Donovan, who's the lead of Burn Notice. But because of, I think, probably contract negotiations or something, it kept getting pushed back. And then it ended up landing in this moment where Matt needed to be in the writer's room for the next season of Burn Notice. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't produce it. So he called me up and said, would you want to go to Bogotá, Colombia and produce a movie for 3 months? Wow. And I said, is this a joke? You must be kidding. And he said, no, I think you'd be great for this job. And I can't go because I'm doing the Burn Notice writer's room right now. And if something happens to you, it won't affect the Burn Notice writer's room. You're kind of, indispensable. Expendable, yeah. but I was like, I can't say no to this. So I flew down there, and for 3 months I worked with Matt and Jeffrey Donovan and Bruce Campbell, and we made this prequel, which I think turned out pretty good.
Very, very cool. And you also, around that time, wrote the dark indie thriller Insight, which with Adam Baldwin, Christopher Lloyd, it's Justified's Natalie. Is it Z?
Natalie Z? Yeah.
Z. Okay.
Yeah. That's another one of those examples of we wrote that screenplay probably 4 years before it got made.
Wow.
And we wrote it to be we wrote it to be made, obviously, but like halfway through the process, it became clear that the company that had originally had shown interest, I think they may have even gone out of business or something. But anyway, it was kind of like just a sample. And so we finished it, and then it kind of sat in the drawer for, I'm going to say maybe 5 years, I'm thinking. And all of a sudden, one day we got a call, and it was this director who had somehow read it. I don't know where he got it from, and said, do you still have the rights to this? And we said, yes. And he said, I'd like to make your movie.
Wow.
Like, oh, God, like I had forgotten it. I was like, I need to read it again. Like, I hope it's good. But yeah, he and this guy named Richard Gabai, who'd done a bunch of features, all in the sort of indie, like he's still in like that indie world. Like he does them for pretty small budgets, but he gets them released, and he's got a good eye, and people say like the indie film world is kind of dead, but there's still people out there who do it and do a good job. But he made it, and I feel like I was producing something else when it was made, because I was not on set for that. I think I was either in Colombia or I was in Dallas doing The Good Guys, but I wasn't a part of the actual production, unfortunately. But it turned out really good, and the cast was, Christopher Lloyd is in it. Like, I was very bummed I didn't get to meet him, but
very cool. And then came The Finder.
Yes, The Finder came. It was right after that. We the Good Guys had gone the way of the dodo, and you know what's weird? I'm sorry, as you're asking it, I'm trying to remember how we got The Finder. Mm-hmm. I had interviewed Hart Hansen for Script Magazine in the same way that I interviewed Matt.
Oh, really?
Yes, I did this interview where basically it's like a Gonzo style Hunter Thompson interview where I like go to meet Hart Hansen, and we end up finding a murder, like a dead body on the set, and I think he killed the guy, and then by the end we solved the murder, all while talking about bones. Yeah. And we had a photo shoot. I had a friend of mine who works at the Stan Winston company make a disgusting corpse that we used for the photo shoot, like this decomposing body. Wow. And it's like creature effects. I mean, it was a whole production just for a 1,500 word article about bones. And Hart, much like Matt, remembered that and was like, this is like a Bones episode. Like, I need to kind of read your sample. So we sent him a sample, and then he actually called me up and said, if The Finder goes, you're going to be the first person I hire. And that is actually what happened. So, wow. Yeah. So Script Magazine really I owe all my success to Script Magazine, I guess is what I'm saying.
Wow. And I should mention, in one of my daughter, she's 10-year-old, one of her favorite franchises is Home Alone. Yes. How on earth did you end up with one of the Home Alone episodes?
So Wade and I had pitched a TV show to Fox Television Studios, and we had developed it sort of with them in mind. And as we were pitching it, it became clear. Basically, we thought it was a sure thing. I think somewhat probably with some cockiness in our energy. We were like, they're gonna buy this idea. Well, they did not buy it. They didn't buy it, and I was like, I can't believe it. Like, what the hell? And one of the development execs about a week later called me and said, we talked about it. It just wasn't right for us at this time. We feel bad. We really want to work with you guys. Would you be interested in writing the next Home Alone movie? And I was like, what? And they're like, we don't want to offend you. And I was like, offend me? No. I was like, John Hughes is like a hero. I was like, are you kidding me? Absolutely. We'll do it. I was like, let's do it. Yes. Sign us up. Like, I was so excited. So we, figured out the deal and then jumped in. It was like, it was a great experience. John Hughes wrote the first 3 Home Alones.
Oh, he wrote the third as well?
Yeah, he did. And it's just a really clever mousetrap. Now, obviously, none of them are as good as the first one. I mean, everyone knows that, but like, they're very clever. So we really, had fun, like figuring out like a new, basically, can we make it for a new audience? Like, update it in a way that isn't that doesn't feel corny.
Hmm.
And I think we managed to succeed in a lot of levels. It turned out really good. I'm pretty proud of it.
Very, very cool.
So if she hasn't seen it, she should check it out. She will love it.
Cool. Yeah, I know she's seen up to number 4, so she hasn't seen that one.
Yeah, it's a little different than 4. We were able to get away with a lot more. The fourth one was like it was sort of like they were trying to do something different with it, and it was sort of I felt like they'd missed the mark a little bit. But
yeah, it was a little more campy.
It felt campy and it felt TV, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so we were able to. We have our bad guys are Malcolm McDowell,
cool.
Debbie Mazar, and Eddie Steeples from My Name Is Earl, and we had Ed Asner. I mean, it's a really great cast. So check it out.
Very cool. And then most recently, NBC's Do No Harm. How did that come about?
Do No Harm. The guy who created it, his name is David Schulner, a great writer, and he and I and Wade went to undergrad together. Actually,
no,
yeah. So I've known him for a long time, and so out here, when you're in the business, like you always have friends that you share your ideas with, and you get notes on before you take scripts out. So Dave has that relationship with me, and I have it with him, and we share scripts. And so I'd read an early draft of Do No Harm, and had said, "Oh my God, if this goes, it's really good. Like I would love to be a part of it." And when it started to look like it was going to be picked up by NBC, we had our agents reach out to the other producers on the show and just like basically get us in the right room, because we really wanted to work with Dave and to work on that show. So that was a little bit of kismet and a little bit of pounding the pavement. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. It was a show, obviously, now it's kind of a historic failure in terms of its ratings. But,
oh no.
But that said, like the process and the people that I worked with were just incredible, like really, really good. It's one of those things where you never know what's going to stick on television. So we really fought to make the show really great, and then it just didn't connect with audiences. People didn't show up to watch it, so it got pulled pretty early. I think they're going to re-air them this summer. We'll see. But yeah, it was that's how I got in, and it was a really cool show.
Very, very cool. And I just going to mention the fact that the two of you are also writing a new comic for SKYBOUND, entitled Clone.
Yes, it's very cool. It's very exciting. The first of our arc came out last month, issue 6. Issue 7 will be coming out in mid-May, and we're still going. We're actually working on the next arc after that, so it's going to keep going. And it's a cool sort of grounded sci-fi world where a guy discovers he's been cloned, is the premise. But it's not like super sci-fi. It's very like real.
Cool. So I'm curious then, because you did say that you wanted to focus on TV, and you are still taking gigs with comics. You still continue to direct for the stage, and then you did the Home Alone feature. So are you still kind of open to different genres and different mediums, or are you really trying to gradually hone in more and more on TV?
Well, now it's been 4 or 5 years. I've been solely doing, I'd say primarily doing television writing. And I think that will continue. I mean, that's what I love it, and that's what I like to do. But I do believe that like basically writing, it's a muscle, and you have to work it. So like when we were brought on to Clone to help write this graphic novel, like I couldn't wait, because it was a new medium, and it was working out different muscles, like things that I because it forces you to tell a story in a different way. Like there's an economy. You only have 22 pages in a comic, so you're really, really like have to really think through the structure and the plot, and like what is the least you can say to communicate what you want to communicate. So to answer your question, like I always want to push myself artistically to find, because I don't know what I'm going to discover writing a comic that I can bring back into TV, or when I work on a stage, for the stage. Similarly, it's like that's just producing, but we don't have a camera; it's an audience. I just feel like if you just only sit in your room writing and you don't do anything else, like you can maybe fall into a rut. Maybe some people can do that, but I want to just constantly challenge myself and put myself in situations that are somewhat scary and unknown, and see if I can sort of accomplish the goal.
Yeah, well, and I think that's very, very valid. I know I've also talked to, we're taping this before his interview, but Mark Verheiden, who wrote tons of graphic novels and comics, and then started writing for Smallville, Battlestar Galactica, Heroes, etc. And it just occurs to me that a lot of my favorite TV shows happen to be ones that just feel very graphic novelish.
Yeah, I mean, and nowadays, like a lot of the goal for Clone is turn it into a TV show for sure. Like we're breaking the episodes as if we would break a television episode. And we're breaking the arcs like we'd break a season. Like nowadays, like there's so much stuff that's based on other material, and so it seems like a great opportunity to basically have full ownership of this idea before we sell it.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So, as a strategy for getting your own show off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very cool. So. We are basically caught up to the present, and I should mention that you were on the TV Writer Chat. As this will be released in June, the chat just happened from when we're speaking, May 4th, 5th-ish. So I would urge everybody to go back to that chat. You can find the chat transcript at tvwriterchat.com. And there was a lot of great wisdom from Aaron on that chat, and I don't want to rehash all of that, but why don't we talk a little bit about tips, as you've done a whole bunch of different stuff, but you've also you've come at TV from so many different angles, especially interviewing for Script Magazine, and then actually being in the writing room. You've learned a lot of stuff along the way. Also, having a writing partner has given you a new insight to the process. So tell me, first of all, for somebody breaking into TV, what should they be thinking?
What should they be thinking?
In terms of now that you've been through all of this, is there anything that you've learned along the way that you would advise somebody, if you want to break into TV, you should do this?
Well, yes, I guess the thing which I feel like it seems a lot of this advice always sounds so trite, but it really isn't. Which is you have to read a lot of scripts, you have to write a ton. And you have to watch TV. You have to watch the TV and movies, the things that inspire you. Like you can learn so much from watching people do shows the way that you respond to, you know. But like when I started, like Wade and I would write. I think we'd write up to four to five spec scripts a year. Some based on existing shows, some original pilots. And you know, I would say, you know, when we were first breaking in, like I would say probably only 1/5 of those each year would ever be read or used. But we didn't know which one would hit. And we would, if there was a new show on the air that we really responded to, we would try to write one to learn what they were doing. And so we've written 20 or 30 different show spec scripts. And again, most people haven't, you know, in the business, like people probably haven't read most of those. But we learned how a rescue me is broken and what it means to write a rescue me by doing it. You know, we wrote in Arrested Development to see if we could figure out what Mitch Hurwitz is doing, because it's such an amazing show. That kind of thing. So I feel like when we started out, and I recommend this to everybody, is you can't be like, I'm going to write one spec this year and think that's going to be helpful to you. Like the more you write, the better you'll get, you know, and the better you get, the faster you'll write. And then it kind of spirals. And there's so many great writers and there's so much great TV right now that if you pick a show and then start analyzing it, like, you know, House of Cards right now is such a great show. Like if you can get your hands on a script, or if you can study the structure and then try to write your own version of that, try to find those voices, at the end of it, you will have learned. It's not tangible. It's not something that you can specifically say, but you definitely will have improved your writing skills, you know?
Interesting. So writing the specs is not just I'm going to carefully craft the one item that I think would be best for my portfolio. It's like going to the gym and exercising. Yes,
and I think you do have to think about what your portfolio is for sure, but like you need more than just you basically when you get your first job, for the most part, most people get on a staff. You will be mimicking the showrunner. You'll be mimicking the show, right? You're going to be writing your best version of Smallville or your best version of The Office or whatever show that you get hired on. You need to be able to blend into. You don't want to make your script different, right? Yours has to be good, of course, but like you don't want it to be not the voice. And there's certain people that have great voices that don't know how to mimic. And that's a technique, and it's a technique that you can learn by writing in the style of other shows, you know?
And so then once you get in, what are some of your tips about when you first are in the writing room? What to do, what not to do?
The big thing is, I think, when you're finally working, and it makes sense when you say it, but it's a collaborative room, right? So you want to be, if it's your first job or you're early on, you want to listen and observe, and the goal is always to keep the train moving. You know, you don't want to be the person who is constantly shooting down ideas or preventing, like, oh, that would never happen, or I don't believe that. Because that doesn't help anything. Like, it's better to, if something isn't working, you always come in with an idea of how to either make it work or another solution that gets you to the same point. You don't want to be the person that's putting up walls.
Yeah.
Because writing is hard, obviously. We all know that. And when you're in a big group of people, you want everyone to be pushing this boulder up the mountain together. You don't want one person standing off the side, their arms crossed, being like, no, this is dumb. And that, I wouldn't say that happens very often, but once in a while there's someone who just digs their heels in on something, and it's like, you're not really helping the process. We really need to get this, you know, like we can fix it later if it doesn't exactly work, but let's just get the big beats where we need to get the big beats and then go from there. So I always feel like when you're first in a room, you know, it's like listening, observing, and basically trying to lift up the weight and not be the wall.
That ties in with, I don't know if you've ever seen, John Cleese has these amazing lectures on creativity.
No, someone else, maybe it was you that mentioned it on the TV writer chat. I need to see them.
Oh, you absolutely should. Just Google John Cleese creativity, and he makes some really, really fascinating points about just processes that are necessary for creativity. And one of the things he mentions is that even just creativity itself, you cannot have negativity. It just, as soon as you have any sort of editing, it ceases to be creative.
Right.
And the other thing he talks about is how you have to be open to intermediate possibles, he calls them. And that being able to dabble and play is crucial to get to, like, as you play and as you dabble, you may come up with 10 different things that aren't part of the final solution. But when you do come to the final solution, parts of those 10 will be in there.
Yes. And there's also, as most people know, there's not really a right answer when it comes to creativity. Like, there's beats that might not feel true, but like there's so many different options for every beat. And so allowing yourself to open your mind to, like, if you're in the room and you know that a scene should end a certain way, allowing yourself the possibility that you're right and the person who has the other version is also right. Like, it's not like there's a winner. It's like, well, then the question becomes, rather than I think your version is wrong, the question becomes, okay, well, let's talk about your version and let's see where will that lead us in the episode, and is that where we want to end up, and where does my idea lead us, and is that where we want to end up, and then maybe there's even a third version that will get us to even a better solution at the end of the episode. The minute you think like there's only one road, like, it's not, you're no longer writing, you're no longer being creative. You're just like, it's like a paint by numbers or something.
Very, very cool. And so, what do you think are some of the mistakes that you see people making that prevent them from either breaking in or getting ahead?
Well, I think the one I mentioned earlier, which is not writing a lot and not being fully versed in the world that you want to work in, you know, like not knowing all the shows and being able to talk and think intelligently about the things that are working on the air right now. And the other thing that's sort of a weird one is just like is basically getting notes. Like, you want to be able to get your script to people and you know, your script is never done, right? Like, I remember when I was first starting out, I'd finish a script and be like, and we're finished. You know? But really, like, in the world of TV, like, you're going to get notes. If you're on a show, you're going to get notes from a lot of different people. Your co-write, people who work in the writer's room with you, the studio, the network, the actors, the production team. Like, you're going to get tons of notes of all different ways. And Matt Nix instilled this early on when I was working with him on Good Guys, which is we should try to take every note. Like rather than like have the attitude of like, I'm smarter than you, that note's stupid, which some people do have. It's like, well, no, maybe think about something bumped in that person's brain on a moment, and maybe their solution might be a bad one, like their pitch of how to fix it, but that doesn't mean the problem isn't there. So we always try to basically really consider every moment, talk it through, and maybe there's a way to solve it a different way, but to make the script better. So a mistake I definitely have seen people make is people being like unwilling to hear notes, to realize that like that's actually the process is absorbing all the good ideas you can from the people you trust.
Very, very cool. And just shifting a little bit into pilots and development, because you have done some you sold a pilot. I'm sure you've developed others. What are some tips that you might give on when somebody's developing a pilot, how to set themselves up for success?
Well, if it depends on, I guess, your level of like where you are in the biz, actually. But basically, like if you're really young, like it's unlikely that you'll sell it. I mean, if you're not young in age, I mean, like if you don't have a lot of experience, it's not impossible for sure, but it's definitely a lot harder. But all that doesn't matter. Really, when you're writing a pilot, if you're thinking of a new idea, you want your pilot to be a calling card for yourself, and you want it to be so good that people will want to make it, even though you don't have a lot of experience. You want people to talk about it, pass it around. Because I think a lot of people I know who are trying to sell ideas, they spend so much time on these like show Bibles and this like, here's the first 3 seasons mapped out, and here are these like 30-page character descriptions. And I tend to think that you can do all that work for yourself because it helps flesh out the world that you're creating as your pilot. But as a piece of material, it's kind of, at least in my experience, has been sort of not important at all. The most important thing is that script. That's what people want to read. And if that script is good, like then they can ask you, well, do you know where it goes in episode 2? Do you know where it goes in season 2? But like you don't necessarily need that. That shouldn't be the first thing you hand to people. It's like, here's the first 3 seasons all mapped out. It's like, most shows don't get past 3 episodes on the air. Like, let's calm down, everybody. Yeah. Let's just try to make the first episode really good and make the pilot really good. I also think nowadays, and I'm sure some of the other writers you've talked to have mentioned this, but now it used to be you needed just a spec of an existing TV show to get read. And now I think you kind of need one of that to show that you can emulate the voice of another show, but a tool, because it's your voice and it's your it's like it's all you, like you can just make it your own however. And so Wade and I, after working on a TV show that didn't ever air called The Oaks with Sean Ryan a couple years ago, we were given all these notes from the executives that wanted to take this kind of creepy haunted house idea and turn it into a procedural. They're like, can you make one of the characters a cop and every week he'll solve a case? No, that's not what the show is. Well, can you maybe make one of them a lawyer and they like represent somebody every week? It's like, no, this isn't a procedural. Like, we don't want to do this. And the notes were so aggravating. And the show never aired. And so then Wade and I decided we would write the super procedural. And so one of our first, it wasn't our first, but maybe like one of the early spec pilots we wrote is a pilot called Dr. Lawyer Cop, PI. Okay. And it's Dr. Lawyer Cop, PI. And that's actually where my Twitter handle came from. My Twitter handle is @DrLawyerCop. But it was basically a hour-long show that was basically every act was a different procedural. It was based with one character, this guy named Dr. Jack Lawyer Cop, who was obviously like, he was every single thing a network executive could want in one character. He knows exactly how far he can push people as a cop before he breaks their arm. But then he can set the arm because he's a doctor, and then he also knows how to get out of the internal affairs investigation because he's also a lawyer. Oh my goodness! But that was like, we wrote that knowing like no one is going to produce this pilot.
Yeah.
Like, it is like almost like a slap in the face of all network executive notes.
Yeah.
Like we put it all in there. I think our tagline was, did we mention he can cook? And the funny thing is that script got passed around everywhere and network executives loved it.
Wow.
And we got so many meetings. We got tons of work from it. And it was a pilot that we knew going into it, we could never sell it.
Yeah.
And that allowed us to be liberated from trying to think of like the commerce side. Like, well, is this commercial? What network would this be on? Like, we didn't think about any of that. We just tried to. And
you didn't do a season map up to season 4.
We did not do a character description. And our characters were good, believe me. But I'm thinking of it now. It's like it's absurd. Like, but because it was our voice and it was pure. Like, people, we got us in the right rooms. Like, people, wanted to meet us, and then we had other scripts that could say, yeah, we have ones that aren't this silly. This is this pilot, or this is a spec of whatever. But the thing that the pilot did for us was we allowed us to show our voice. Like Matt Nix read it early on, and that's one of the things he flipped about. That's why he knew we would be good on The Good Guys, because it was like our spec was this absurd, sort of weird, twisted cop show, and he's like, "Oh, that's perfect."
Very cool.
I'd say, like, going forward, like, think about finding your own voice and showcasing it in your pilot is just really important.
Very cool. So we are getting close to the end of our time here. I would say if I were to sum up a lot of what you were saying, it is exercise your writing muscle as much as you can and in as many different ways as you can, and don't be afraid to think outside the box. Absolutely. That's a good. I was wondering if you were going to be able to summarize all my ranting, and you did a pretty good job. I also feel like in life, if there's something that scares you, artistically, you should probably try it, because that's a really great way to grow. Very cool. Well, that is a great place to end up, and I do wish you every success. And well, thank you, Gray. It's been such a pleasure to be on here. Cool. And I'm sure people are going to learn a lot from this interview. And as you mentioned, your Twitter handle is @DrLawyerCop. So I'm sure people can tweet you questions if they have any. And I do tweet a lot of TV writer stuff as it comes up. Very cool. And do go back and check out Aaron's great TV writer chat transcript in early May. So, and before I forget, if you want to go to the Tumblr, I'm trying to think of my Tumblr. I think it's aaronginsburg.tumblr.com. And on there, if they scroll through, I think they type in script, or if they scroll through my updates, posted a bunch of old Script Magazine articles about some of the sort of biggest setbacks and hilarious failures, and they're just there for free, so people should check them out. Very cool. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for taking this time, and hopefully we'll hear good news from your future projects. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Cool. Okay, thanks. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye. Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for script writing information in print and on the web.